Picture this. November 1981, Portland, Oregon. The golden age of arcade gaming is in full swing. Kids are putting quarters into Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, and Galaga machines. The neon lights flicker, electronic beeps and bloops fill the air, and somewhere in the black corner of a neighborhood arcade sits a machine that would become one of gaming's greatest mysteries. This is the story of Polybius, an arcade game so dangerous it was pulled from arcades after just 1 month. A game that supposedly caused seizures, memory loss, and hallucinations. A game watched by mysterious black men in suits who collected data but never touched the quarters. A game that, according to legend, was part of a secret government mind control experiment. But here's the thing about Polybius. There's no real proof it ever existed. Welcome to the rabbit hole of gaming's most lasting urban legend. A tale that's equal parts fascinating and frustrating, mysterious and maddening. This is a story about the power of shared memory, the birth of internet folklore, and how real events can turn into amazing myths. Before we dive deeper into this mystery, let me share some fascinating details that make the Polybius legend even more interesting. The fake company that supposedly created the game was called Sinneslotion, which translates from German to sensory deprivation, or to delete the senses. Portland, Oregon was actually a known testing ground for new arcade games in the 1980s, making it the perfect setting for this urban legend. The Polybius legend has appeared in The Simpsons, Loki, The Goldbergs, and many other TV shows, becoming a regular part of pop culture conspiracy theories. No ROM file of the game has ever been found, despite ROM preservation being extremely common for 1980s arcade games. To understand Polybius, we need to travel back to 1981, Portland, Oregon. It wasn't just any year, and Portland wasn't just any city for arcade gaming. In the 1980s, Portland was used as a test market for new arcade games. It was common to go into an arcade and see new games without a title, or with a working title that would later be changed. The city had become a testing ground for the industry, making it the perfect setting for our tale. November 29th, 1981, was a day that would plant the seeds of legend without anyone knowing it. That day, 12-year-old Brian Morrow made headlines for trying to break the Asteroids Marathon record. After 28 hours of play, fueled by Coca-Cola and determination, he had to stop because of stomach pain and exhaustion. Around the same time, another player, Michael Lopez, got a migraine and blacked out after playing Tempest. Both incidents were reported locally and were seen as human interest stories or cautionary tales about overdoing it at the arcade. These real incidents show the intense, sometimes unhealthy devotion players had to arcade games in that era. While they aren't directly connected to the Polybius legend, it's easy to see how memories of such events, combined with Portland's reputation as an arcade test market, helped create perfect conditions for myths like Polybius to take root. The Brian Morrow and Michael Lopez incidents might have stayed a local curiosity, but 10 days later, something happened that added a very real element of government mystery to Portland's arcade scene. On December 9th, 1981, the Federal Bureau of Investigation raided several Portland arcades in the area. The lead-up to the raid involved FBI agents watching arcade cabinets for evidence of tampering and recording high scores. The FBI did investigate illegal gambling operations tied to arcades in the early 1980s, including in Portland. Agents reportedly watched certain cabinets for tampering and evidence collection. While details about mass arrests are unclear, government raids on arcades suspected of illegal gambling are part of the documented history of that era. This wasn't some wild conspiracy theory. It actually happened. The FBI rigged Galaxian, Scramble, and Tempest arcade cabinets with microphones and cameras to record evidence of illegal activities. The reason? Many arcades in the 1980s were under suspicion of running illegal gambling rings. Arcade owners had been modifying their machines by wiring them with counters to record how many games a player had built up, then paying out money instead of points. Government officials were a common sight in arcades as they investigated these rings. According to the Oregonian newspaper, after a year of watching, warrants were issued, and a 48-year-old arcade operator later admitted he was rigging his games for gambling. There are reports that law enforcement used sting operations and watched arcades for illegal gambling activity, though there is no verifiable evidence that entire arcades were run by undercover agents as part of these operations. Imagine being a kid in Portland in late 1981. First, you hear about two players getting seriously sick at an arcade. Then, barely a week later, FBI agents are raiding the same places you go to play games, taking machines and making arrests. The agents would often open machines for inspection and collect monitoring devices that had been placed there earlier. Tempest cabinets were commonly used for these watching purposes, and when the FBI took them away, it created a shortage of Tempest machines in the Portland area. The stage was perfectly set for an urban legend. Real sick kids, real government agents, real arcade raids. All it needed was time to grow in the shared imagination, and eventually the internet to help it spread. For nearly 2 decades, these events existed only in local memory. Kids who were there told stories. Rumors spread through schools, but there was no central story, no single source documenting the truth of what happened. Then came the internet. The first online mention of Polybius is a coinop.org article dated 1998. It includes a supposed screenshot of the title screen, allegedly from a ROM image file created from one of the original arcade machines. This website, run by Kurt Kohler, was designed to catalog information about vintage arcade games. Polybius appeared as an entry on coinop.org, the arcade game database site, where its sparse description helped fuel the emerging legend. The original entry was sparse but tantalizing. It described an abstract puzzle space shooter game named after a Greek historian that was only released in 1 or 2 arcades outside of Portland. The game was allegedly developed by a company called Sinneslogen, a name derived from the German words Sinne, or senses, and Logen, to extinguish or to delete, though the way they are combined is unusual. More idiomatically, it translates to sensory deprivation. The coinop.org entry claimed the game had caused various psychological effects in players and was monitored by mysterious figures. But it offered no real proof, just a screenshot that could easily have been created in Photoshop and promises of a ROM file that never appeared. Based on the timeline of publications, researchers concluded that the game was almost certainly invented to promote coinop.org. The hypothesis makes sense. Create an intriguing mystery to drive traffic to your arcade database website. And traffic it certainly drove. The earliest known print reference to the game is the September 2003 issue of GamePro in an article called Secrets and Lies that explored various gaming urban legends. The owner of coinop.org, Kurt Kohler, had messaged the American video game magazine GamePro about Polybius. From there, the legend began to take on a life of its own. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Polybius legend is the name itself. It's almost too perfect, too loaded with meaning for a simple arcade game. Polybius had been described as almost too good a name for a spooky video game. It's named after the classical Greek historian Polybius, born in Arcadia around 200 BC, and known for his assertion that historians should never report what they cannot verify through interviews with eyewitnesses. Think about that for a moment. The legendary game is named after a historian famous for saying you shouldn't report things you can't verify, and there are no verifiable witnesses to the game's existence. The real Polybius was also known for his work on puzzles and secret codes, such as the Polybius square, a cipher used for encoding secret messages. This cipher arranged letters of the alphabet in a 5x5 grid and represented each letter with coordinate numbers, a system that allowed for secure long-distance communication using torches or other signals. Was this an incredibly clever inside joke by whoever created the legend? A hint that the whole thing was an elaborate puzzle? Well played indeed. The name choice becomes even more fascinating when you consider the broader context of 1980s paranoia and mind control fears. Polybius the historian lived through the rise of the Roman Empire. He witnessed how a republic could transform into something more authoritarian. For a game allegedly designed for mind control, named after someone who warned against accepting unverified accounts, the symbolism is almost too rich. Stephen Roach is a name that appears in the depths of internet forums and urban legend websites, not as a journalist, developer, or public figure, but as an anonymous user who claimed to have first-hand knowledge of one of gaming's most enduring myths. According to a post he made in the early 2000s, Roach alleged that he had been part of the development team behind the game, working for a supposed company called Sinislosion. He claimed the game was originally intended as a psychological experiment commissioned by a mysterious third party, but after it caused severe side effects in players, ranging from seizures to amnesia, it was quickly pulled from arcades. Roach's story was posted on a now-defunct gaming website and is filled with sensational claims. He described himself as a whistleblower, coming forward after years of silence to set the record straight. However, his post provided no hard evidence, no company records, no team names, no technical details, just vague recollections and unverifiable assertions. He also refused to engage in follow-up discussions or provide proof of his identity, which only added to the skepticism surrounding his claims. Researchers and skeptics have long suspected that the Stephen Roach persona was part of a larger hoax. Some believe he was a troll trying to capitalize on the growing mythos of Polybius, which had already been circulating for years by the time he'd appeared. Others think the Roach story was an intentional attempt to deepen the mystery, possibly using multiple sock puppet accounts across forums to fabricate a sense of authenticity. Despite the lack of evidence, Roach's post continues to be cited in documentaries, YouTube videos, and Reddit threads, often presented alongside government conspiracy theories and Men in Black-style anecdotes. In the end, Stephen Roach remains as mysterious as the game he claimed to help create. With no traceable background, no corroborating evidence, and no known public appearances, he exists more as a ghost in the machine, another layer of digital myth in the ever-expanding legend of Polybius. One aspect of the Polybius legend that particularly interested gaming experts was the description of its alleged technology. According to the legend, a new video game appeared in neighborhood arcades around Portland, Oregon in 1981. Released during the golden age of arcade video games, it was housed in a simple black cabinet. The game was abstract and geometric, but highly addictive. More specifically, the game was described as using impossible technology for its time. The intense combination of vector and raster graphics described in Polybius stories would have been highly unusual and difficult to achieve in 1981, adding to the legend's sense of technological mystery. This detail is particularly interesting because it shows some technical knowledge on the part of whoever created the legend. Vector graphics, using mathematical equations to draw lines, and raster graphics, using pixels, were indeed two different display technologies in 1981, and combining them in a single game would have been extremely unusual, if not impossible, with the technology of the time. The visual description of Polybius consistently matched one particular game, Tempest. Polybius, or at least the simulations fans have made of the legendary game, was disorienting and confusing. In it, colorful geometric shapes bend and fold from a center portal, like some sort of digital acid trip. This description could easily apply to Tempest, the 1981 Atari game that Michael Lopez had been playing when he collapsed. Some researchers have theorized that Polybius was actually a confused or distorted memory of Tempest, possibly a prototype version that was tested in Portland before the final release. As one commenter of the original coinop.org page wrote, "Personally, I suspect it was just a prototype for one of the above games mentioned, caused Pikachu syndrome in more than the rare amount of people it occurred to, was toned down, and then released." But even this hypothesis has problems. Tempest was released by Atari, a major company that kept detailed records. There's no evidence of unusual prototype testing in Portland, and no record of the game being significantly modified due to health concerns. While Polybius itself appeared to be fictional, the fears it represented were very real. The legend emerged during a period when government mind control experiments weren't just possible, they were documented fact. In the 1950s, the United States Office of Strategic Services, predecessor to the CIA, recruited more than 1,500 scientists, technicians, and engineers from Nazi Germany as part of a program called Operation Paperclip. This was followed by even more sinister programs. The government did practice mind control testing through the use of drugging people without their knowledge, sensory deprivation, verbal and sexual abuse, and potentially aerosol distribution of certain drugs, in an attempt to manipulate people's mental states and alter the ways in which brains function. This project was named MK Ultra, and it took place in the 1950s and the 1960s, although similar testing took place outside the program between 1940 and 1974. There were deaths, government cover-ups, destroyed documentation, all of the necessary components for the start of a brilliant urban legend. The timing is crucial here. MK Ultra officially ended in 1973, just 8 years before Polybius supposedly appeared. Despite an attempted cover-up, a cache of 20,000 documents were revealed in 1977, and more information was declassified in 2001, showing over 185 researchers and 80 institutions participating in experiments with mind control, resulting in terrible effect on the research subjects. Moreover, the United States military has modified several video games to train soldiers. In the early 1980s, they commissioned Atari to modify the tank combat game Battlezone into a tank training simulator called the Bradley Trainer. The military's interest in gaming technology was real and documented. This context makes the Polybius legend particularly powerful. It combines real government overreach with emerging technology in a way that feels plausible, even probable, to people aware of programs like MK Ultra. As the Polybius legend grew, serious researchers began investigating its claims. The results were universally negative, but that didn't stop the story from spreading. "I scoured multiple trade office websites and found no historical record of syneslosion anywhere," wrote researcher Anthony Dennis. "The name Polybius, too, has some suspicious origin. I believe the person who came up with the name Polybius did indeed have some interest in or knowledge of Greek history." The absence of evidence was comprehensive. No records of the machine can be found from its purported 1981 release to the entry at coinop.org in 2000. There's no record of a company called Syneslosion during this time. There's no record of any copyright information. There's no release info or reviews for Polybius. Perhaps most tellingly, for the first run of the first dedicated video game magazine, Electronic Games, 1981 to 1985, not one mention was made of Polybius in any of its pages. No news of this upcoming game, nor any reviews of what was supposedly a super popular machine. No information at all. This represents a 22-year information void, impossible for a game that allegedly caused such a sensation and government intervention. Freedom of Information Act requests to the U.S. government have yielded nothing. though some might say that's what they want you to think. The gaming community has been equally thorough in its search. If the game really existed, the ROM would be ready for download on the web a long, long time ago, noted one skeptic. ROM files for virtually every arcade game from the 1980s have been preserved and shared online, but Polybius remains conspicuously absent. Despite, or perhaps because of, its fictional nature, Polybius has had a remarkable impact on pop culture. The legend has inspired games, documentaries, podcasts, and countless internet discussions. In 2007, freeware developers and arcade constructors Rogue Synapse published a free downloadable game titled Polybius for Windows at cynislosion.com. To complete the illusion, Rogue Synapse's owner, Dr. Estelle Vance, founded a Texas-based corporation bearing the name Cynislosion, without the umlaut, which would be present on an actual German word, in 2007. In 2017, Llamasoft announced Polybius for the PlayStation 4, with PlayStation VR support, released on the PlayStation Store on May 9, 2017. In early marketing, its co-author Jeff Minter claimed to have been permitted to play the original Polybius arcade machine in a warehouse in Basingstoke, England. He later acknowledged that this game was inspired by the urban legend, but does not attempt to reproduce its alleged gameplay. The legend has appeared in television shows including The Simpsons, 2006, The Goldbergs, 2013, Dimension 404, 2017, Smiling Friends, 2020, and Loki, 2021. In The Simpsons, the game appeared briefly sporting a property of the US government label, a visual joke that works whether you know the full legend or not. The Loki cameo gained its own acclaim on social media, with some noting that the game seems catastrophically integral to the multiverse. Ernest Cline recalls hearing about Polybius as a whisper across the arcade game floor as a teenage gamer in Central Ohio. Today, Cline is the author and screenwriter of the video game dystopian bestsellers, Ready Player One and Armada. In an interview with podcast producers, Cline cites Polybius as an influence on his work. The legend has even spawned tourism. Bobby Feldstein gives for-profit Polybius walking tours around Portland that attempt to authenticate his experience by returning to the former basement of Coin Kingdom. Feldstein claims to have been abducted after playing the game as a teenager, though his account has been met with skepticism. Why has the Polybius legend proven so lasting? Part of the answer lies in the psychology of how we process information and form beliefs. This sort of nature of the world that we're living in, this idea that consensus reality is being eroded, says documentary filmmaker John Frechette. Everybody has a vision of reality that they've embraced, and it's often reinforced through their online interactions. The internet has created echo chambers where alternative explanations can flourish without being subjected to rigorous fact-checking. On the internet, different stories could meld into a sinister account of a mysterious arcade cabinet, mind control, and Men in Black. Over the years, more users could add their own details to the tale. There's also an appeal of being part of something exclusive or secret. In the early 2000s, I just sort of became aware, like a lot of people who were dwelling on the internet, that there is a killer video game from Portland, says Portland historian Joe Streckert. Being in the know about an obscure legend creates a sense of community among believers. The legend also taps into deeper anxieties about technology and control. In 1981, video games were new and mysterious. Parents and authority figures didn't understand them, leading to fears about their effects on young minds. The Polybius legend crystallizes these fears into a specific narrative. It's been said that urban legends grow out of fear over changes in culture, and when you look at Polybius in that context, it starts making a lot of unexpected sense. It was the golden age of the arcade, with thousands of independently owned and operated locations and millions of cabinets. Politicians, members of the media, and parents saw kids spending a fortune and zoning out in front of screens for hours in a way they hadn't before. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Polybius story is how it's evolved over time. Like all urban legends, it's been shaped by each person who tells it, adding details, removing inconsistencies, and adapting new contexts. As the producers of various documentaries continued their research and interviews, they found a theme. There were as many different versions of the legend as there were people telling it. Some versions emphasize the government conspiracy angle, others focus on the technological impossibility. Still others treat it as a cautionary tale about gaming addiction. The internet has accelerated this evolution. What's more, it's now possible to share foggy memories online. Someone across the country or around the world could read your words and think, huh, yeah, I kind of remember some kid passing out in an arcade too. They add their recollection to your story, which someone else then picks up, on, over and over, like an unintentional game of telephone. This collaborative storytelling has created a legend that feels more real than it would if created by a single person. The multiple perspectives and seemingly corroborating details give it a verisimilitude that pure fiction lacks. While Polybius itself appears to be fictional, the story it tells about the early 1980s arcade scene is largely accurate. Arcades were indeed somewhat shady places. The FBI was investigating them. Kids really did get sick from playing games for too long. Government mind control experiments really did happen. Each individual speculation about the game Polybius has a basis in reality, notes researcher Catherine Despira. The legend works because it takes real elements and combines them into a narrative that feels possible, even probable. In that sense, Polybius might be more true than factual. It captures something real about the fears and anxieties of its time, even if the specific details are fabricated. The legend also highlights how memory works and how it fails. People who claim to remember playing the game recall different and contradictory gameplay experiences. This isn't necessarily deception. Human memory is notoriously unreliable, especially for events from decades ago. Looking at Polybius through a contemporary lens, it's hard not to see parallels with modern concerns about technology and manipulation. We now know that social media platforms use sophisticated algorithms to capture and hold our attention. We've seen how online games can become addictive, how screen time can affect mental health, and how technology companies conduct psychological experiments on users. In 2024, the idea of a video game designed to manipulate minds doesn't seem far-fetched at all. The difference is that today's manipulation is commercial rather than governmental, and it's happening in plain sight rather than in secret. The Polybius legend anticipated these concerns by decades. It imagined a world where entertainment could be weaponized, where technology could be used to control rather than to liberate, and where the line between fun and exploitation could become dangerously blurred. Today, more than 40 years after Polybius supposedly appeared and disappeared, the legend continues to fascinate new generations of gamers and conspiracy theorists. On May 16, 2009, an update to the coinop.org page promised to bring further information after a trip to Kyiv, Ukraine, to investigate. As of 2025, no further information has been added to the page. The promise of revelation, always just around the corner, is part of what keeps the legend alive. There's always another lead to follow, another witness to interview, another theory to explore. At the time of writing of this script, Polybius would be approximately 44 years old. That is a long time, and not a single shred of verifiable evidence has revealed itself. Yet the absence of evidence has done nothing to diminish the legend's appeal. If anything, Polybius has become more relevant in our current era of viral misinformation and alternative facts. It prefigured many of the dynamics we see today, how stories spread online, how they evolve through retelling, and how people become invested in narratives that confirm their existing beliefs. The Polybius legend offers insights that extend far beyond gaming culture. It's a case study in how information spreads in the internet age, how communities form around shared beliefs, and how fiction and reality can become intertwined. It also demonstrates the enduring power of storytelling. Even when we know a story isn't literally true, it can still convey important truths about the world we live in. Polybius might not have existed, but the fears and anxieties it represents certainly do. The legend also highlights the importance of skeptical thinking and evidence-based reasoning. While it's harmless enough to believe in a fictional arcade game, the same mechanisms that sustain the Polybius legend can be applied to more consequential beliefs about politics, health, and society. Perhaps the most important lesson from the Polybius legend is what it teaches us about the nature of truth in the digital age. We live in a time when the distinction between fact and fiction can become increasingly blurred, when compelling narratives can spread faster than fact checkers can debunk them. The Polybius story demonstrates how real events can be transformed into fictional narratives that feel more true than the actual facts. It shows how communities can form around shared stories, regardless of their literal accuracy. And it illustrates how the desire for meaning and connection can sometimes override concerns about factual accuracy. This doesn't mean the truth doesn't matter, quite the opposite. The Polybius legend succeeds precisely because it incorporates enough real elements to feel plausible. Its power comes from the way it weaves together documented facts about arcade raids, sick children, and government experience into a narrative that makes emotional, if not literal, sense. So what should we make of Polybius, the game that captured imaginations while never capturing quarters? In the end, the question of whether Polybius really existed might be less important than the story that it reveals about us, our fears, our desires, our relationship with technology, and our need for meaning in an increasingly complex world. And perhaps that's the most important lesson of all. In an age of information overload and competing narratives, the stories that endure aren't necessarily the ones that are most true in a literal sense, but the ones that are most true in our deepest concerns and highest aspirations. Polybius endures because it captures something essential about what it means to be human in a technological age. The excitement and the horror of possibilities we can barely imagine, the constant tension between progress and peril, and the eternal question of whether we control our tools or they control us. The game that never was teaches us more about ourselves than many games that actually existed. And in the end, maybe that's the point. Maybe the real Polybius was the questions we asked along the way. Thanks for listening.